If you're joining us on Facebook Live, welcome. I am Randy Olive. Obviously, you probably already know that. If you're on my page, it means we're friends. So I shouldn't have to introduce myself, and yet here I am. You may not recognize me because I did give myself my own haircut during quarantine because I think it's hilarious and I like attention. So there we go. I am going to today change the way I have been bringing my content into the world, and I want to be able to speak to a couple of the things that I get asked a lot, and people ask me, like, what makes me tick? What brings me to life? Well, there's a few books that really, it's a short list of books, but a few books that have truly reframed the way that I think and my perception on a lot of things, just life and in business in general. So what I'm doing in this next few days is I'm going to introduce you guys to some of the books, give you some of the key concepts that came out of the book that really adjusted how I thought, how I felt, how I looked, my mindset, how to move forward. And so today is actually one of my most favorite books in the world. It's A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. I'm going to flip this around. It looks like that. That's my audiobook version. I give this book away all the time. Actually, I bet in the past 5 years, I've probably given away 50 of these books. It really is, to me, a really interesting concept. And I want to do it justice today by giving credit where credit is due and speak about it summary fashion first, and then come into the way that I applied it to my own life. And so with that being said, one of the coolest things to me when I looked at this book and when I began to read it, it's from a guy named Donald Miller. Many of us know now because he has gone from being this essay kind of book writer into now he's in this frame of marketing and business world. Has created a really great company based off of his, one of his most recent books, Story Brand. And he just looks at it in a way that he spent a lot of time looking at and understanding how to craft story, that everything we do is story. And so he brings that now into the way that he practices and coaches people in business. The idea of this book is really is his birth child for that idea of living a better story. And that's what the whole concept of everything in this book is. It's about living a better story. And I love that idea of living a better story. There's this old cliche phrase, and I say it all the time because I think it's funny. It's like, you can always be best. I just always want to be better, right? You can always be best. I just want to be better. In living a better story, what happened was that Donald Miller wrote a book called Blue Like Jazz, which was an essay kind of compilation of his story. It was like a little bit of a memoir, if you will. And so this memoir had a lot of traction, not just in the Christian world, but obviously kind of in a secular kind of population. Was really interested just because of the way he wrote, had a lot of sarcasm, humor, and just very straight to the point conversations that people could attach to. Well, these two producers out in Nashville got wind of this book, and they called him and said, "Hey, I want to turn your book into a movie." He was like, "No." And then they told him how much they were going to pay him. He said, "Yes, sign me up for that." And so these guys came out, and what he thought in his brain is they were going to take Blue Like Jazz, turn it into a script, and send it out to film. And what they did when they showed up was said, well, here's the problem. Your book is great to read. It'll be terrible to watch. We've got to create the story behind it. We've got to create the story of this. And he thought internally, like, what life am I living that it's not worthy of telling a story? What life am I living that's not worthy of telling a story that would be interesting to people to tune into? He had to literally rewrite his story so that people would find it interesting on the silver screen. Well, we all know that that's there's a lot of reasoning behind that, right? There's a very crafty way in which people make movies, and so I don't think we can all look at that and say, well, my movie would make a very boring movie if you recorded my story. We can still live really great stories, right? The movie world does not need to be our litmus test. But what he looked at was, man, I really am not living in a way that I would be just drawn to tell my story to the world. And so he looked at that from that space and began to think about, how can I start practicing living a better story? How can I start practicing living a better story? The first question that I would love for you guys to look at and to think about is, like, do you have a story worth telling? And that's not to be a judgment call. It's to be a self-reflective. It's for us to be able to look internally and go, do I really have a story worth telling? If somebody were giving me the opportunity to tell my life story, Do I have a story worth telling? I'm going to answer that question. Do I have a story worth telling? The answer is yes. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of cut to the chase. I'll show you the end of the book. The answer is yes. You do have a story worth telling. It's just a matter of, have we taken the time to really look into it, to dig into the cracks of our life and understand where we might be telling the shitty version of a story, right? There is a space in our world where we could improve on our story. We could start telling a better story. And so the culmination of who we are, the world needs that. I love that. Like, if you look at the little nuances of who you are, yes, that is a story worth telling. But there's spaces in our world, 100%, there are spaces in our world where we could be living a better story. And this book kind of challenged me to the core to start looking at my world. Where were some of the areas where I just began to coast versus really digging into and understanding what I could be doing to be telling a better story? So one of the quotes out of this book that I love, I want to read it to you. It says, if you watched a movie about a guy who wanted a Volvo and worked for years to get it, you wouldn't cry at the end when he drove off the lot, testing the windshield wipers, doing his little clicking the signal. You saw a beautiful movie or go home to put on a record on about the stories you've seen. The truth is, you wouldn't remember that movie a week later, except you'd feel robbed and wanted your money back. Nobody cries at the end of a movie about a guy who buys a Volvo. But we spend years actually living those stories and expect our lives to feel meaningful. The truth is, if what we choose to do with our lives won't make a meaningful story, it won't make a life meaningful either. And again, this isn't judgment. This is just that self-reflective moment. I love that little end. The truth is, if we choose to live our lives that way, it won't make a meaningful story. It won't make life meaningful either. And I think here's the trigger in my brain that switched, is that I'm fascinated by stories. I actually love stories. It's one of my favorite things. I can sit there and listen to people tell their stories, and especially a good storyteller for a very long time. One of my favorite books in the world is Great Expectations. I read it all the time, over and over. And I look at those stories and we're just lost in those stories, right? We get entranced by those stories. Well, I don't think our life could be summed up into a book that we could read in 6 hours. But each of our little chapters that are happening in our world, they 100% can be on purpose towards something that crafts a story that would be meaningful. And then when we're telling that better story with our lives, we are moving more into that space of meaningful life, which a lot of us, we want to live a very meaningful life. We don't just want to kind of be the guy that buys a Volvo and the only stories we get to tell is they're like, well, I bought a Volvo, I did my yard, I went for a walk, I got a gym membership. I never went to the gym, but I got a gym membership. You know, we start talking about like these little random things. And instead, what would it look like if we were purposeful about crafting these little mini stories in our life that brought meaning to us every single day? I'm practicing that now. My newest thing is writing little love letters to my kids and my wife every morning. I want to practice what it looks like to have a little bit of a story, a little bit of a love story in my world. The way I get that is to be able to actually participate in the idea of living a better love story. So what does it look like? Do you have a story, and what story are you telling? And the idea of, if you have a story worth telling, we've been digging into those cracks and we've been unearthing the things that we want to do more. I want to be more than the guy who bought a Volvo. I want to be the guy who gave. I want to be the guy who connected. I want to be the guy who just brought life everywhere he went. Okay. So that was my first thing, is, do I even have, like, it hit me through between the eyes, and I wanted to live a better story. I actually had this idea, this dream about getting a tattoo. I was going to get a sleeve. I was going to be a cool tattooed guy. And like with text, the font that was like, live a better story. Like, that was legitimately my goal. I had it designed and everything. I still may do that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm a tattooed guy. I'm 38 and I haven't really done anything yet except for that. Jesse, my older brother, took me to get a tattoo and I was appreciative of it. So, living a better story. Do you have a story to tell? Second thing I look at is there's a section of the book where he starts to talk about the story of his dad, right? And so he had a really tough relationship with his dad. And in the whole book, Blue Like Jazz, which was being made into the movie, his challenges about talking with his dad Or is it like his dad was this hero kind of guy and yet just failed at being a dad? And so he spoke of it in a lot of angst and a lot of judgment, a lot of like true like challenges in his world. And so it was a point of contention in his life. It was a huge conflict in his world. And so in the course of the book, he get to this self-reflective moment of, I have to close this chapter of my life. Dad abandoned me. I got to figure out who this guy is and I got to find him. So he went on a hunt to find his dad. And he turned around that like his dad had passed. And so he was like, cool. So that chapter is closed. I don't have to actually face the conflict of myself. It's just closed. I can just bury the box. All of us who grab our life, cram it into a box, all of our feelings, and we just cram it down. He was like, good. Death, done. It's closed. Well, then he was having a conversation with his mom and found out, actually, your dad is alive. So the research that he did was wrong, and his dad was alive. And in the book, there's so much angst to where Donald Miller is searching for and going to see his dad, that he put a level of commitment. So he thought he found him, thought he was dead. He was actually alive. Well, I think the biggest thing is that there's a follow-through moment that happened. There's that follow-through moment. In my world, there's so many great ideas and so many great feelings and so many great fill in the blank that billows up inside of me. And I think a lot of us get into that same mode, right? We get these things inside of us that just kind of billow up. And then our follow-through breaks apart. And then we actually don't get to tell that story. How awesome would it be for you to tell the story of the ideas, right? Just the ideas that fly into your funnel every single day. Anybody who's watching Thomas the Train, you understand flying into your funnel. Reference, I do have a 4 and a 2-year-old. But this is the point, guys. Our follow-through on telling a better story is what matters. So we can think about these great ideas in these great ways, but it's about follow-through. And most of us will not choose story because of the follow-through. We'll choose more of that moment of ignorance is bliss, right? And I hope it's okay. I want to speak at a 10 if that's all right with you. But if you really think about it, think about where he must have been sitting in this mode of, I just unearthed all my feelings about my dad through this idea of creating a better story through editing my life. And now all of a sudden I feel this drive and this desire to close that chapter. So he just unearthed this box, and then he found out that his dad was dead. Probably felt a little bit of like remorse and challenges, and that box was just sitting there, and he thought it was closed and it was done. And then all of a sudden it was unearthed one more time. It's like, no, it's for real. And now here's the moment. He could have chose to follow through, or he could have chose to not follow through. And a lot of us, when we choose the follow through, we understand that there can be positive that comes out of it, right? But our biggest challenge is about follow through is with fear, because we have a fear of what would happen if. Because when we choose a better story, really what we're doing, we're jumping into the mess. I just have to choose to start the story, right? I have to choose to start moving towards the story. But think about all the movies you've ever seen. There are incidents that happen the whole way that could derail our life. And it's easy to feel safety and not have that fear pop into our world. And yet, when we have follow through to start doing things, to start actually moving into the space of crafting a better story, to practice a better story, to edit our lives in that direction, the reality is that like our joy could turn to sorrow real fast. And the mess could be really messy. And there's a lot of sacrifice, but what also happens along the way is fun and tears and laughter and joy. There's a lot that happens in crafting a story. And so it's easier, I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's easier to choose to be the guy whose story is, I bought a Volvo. Yeah, I didn't make an impact, but I was safe. Story is scary because it brings in fear. And I love this idea. So in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a moment where they're talking about Aslan. And one of the characters in the book, I don't remember which one, was asking about Aslan and said, is he safe? And the beaver goes, no, he's not safe, but he's good. But I think that in the translation of that moment in our own worlds, when we choose story, it's not safe. It's not safe, but it's good. It's not safe, but it's good. Okay? when I started looking at this and understood that moment when he was following through with his dad, I think about all of the moments in my life in which I chose to not live in the moment of telling a better story, and I chose instead the ignorant side of things, because he, in the same vein, could have not followed through, not gone into the moment of moving into the direction of his dad, meeting his dad for the first time since he was a kid, hearing what's happening with his life, seeing like what's going to be. He could have chose to not do that and pictured whatever story was in his brain, and that would have been fine for him for forever. The ignorance is bliss moment. And yet now he has actually a really cool story to tell. And I encourage you guys to read this book if you have time, because that's a really captivating part of the book. There's actually a lot of captivating parts while he starts to tell about the practice stories that he ran through. And so I want you to think about your favorite story, the tension, the twists, the turns. As you're going through all of that, the biggest thing right now is like, are you willing to take the chance? Are you willing to take the chance? Because when we're willing to take the chance, there's a lot of story that happens in that chance, because we're now living in that scary state where, yeah, there's fear, and yet there's also joy. Yeah, there's sacrifice, and yet there's also gifts, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens in that. So again, are you willing to take a chance? So, do I have a story worth telling? Am I willing to take a chance, right? Okay, so as we move through the third thing that I really pulled from this book that made a big difference for me is the idea of characters. I used to look at it as if I was running a monologue in my life, right? I was doing it all on my own. The lone wolf rides alone. And I did that a lot with a lot of my life for a very long time. I was very barriered. I didn't let a lot of people in. And so as I began to listen to this book, as I opened it up and began to absorb it, we need a character to play. I don't know if you realize that or not, but you need a character to play. And you can choose the character, right? You can be the character that's going to mow his lawn every Saturday. You can choose the character that puts dinner and just kind of lives this normal, like, that performs activities instead of tells a story. You can choose that character. That character is in a lot of books, right? There's that character is in a lot of books. There's a lot of stories that we read. There is a B character that just sits in the background the whole time. I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. There's always a B character that sits in the background the whole time. And so when I look at it, man, if I were looking at my life and I was choosing to be able to edit it and I could live a better story, at the end of the day, I want to pick the character that has the most fun. I want to pick the character that moves the way that I want them to move. I want to pick the character that goes forward. And you know what's interesting is that I think a lot of us have chosen characters, and we choose characters, and over a long enough period of time, that became our character. And what we're really missing is that moment to be able to come alive. And here's what's really neat about the idea of character. I get to choose my character, right? I get to be the guy who loves, who's benevolent. I get to be that guy. My life will then start turning into action items that move me in that direction. If I'm going to be that character, I've got to transform into that character. There's going to be moments of transformation in our life. So we're choosing transformation. I don't know if you've ever watched an artist create a sculpture, right, out of like marble, out of rock, but he literally hammers and chisels it away. That is a painful process, and yet it's a good process. Look at the beauty that happens. Okay, hopefully you're seeing the analogy I'm drawing. If you look at somebody who's like forming something out of clay, like they're mashing and kneading and smashing, and yet something beautiful comes out of it. If you look at all of the ways in which creation is made, creation is a very challenging moment. Look at it the way things happen in our world, okay? In those moments, every single thing that we do is shaping us. And when it shapes us, it's not easy. It's not always, it doesn't always feel good. And yet the end product is always absolutely beautiful. So we get to pick the character. But here's the second thing about the character is that, like, the people around us, they need a role to play as well. And that's when we get to invite people into our story. See, this was the most important thing to me about the characters. We get to pick a character. But the most important thing about character is that we get to invite people into our story. A story about one person can be slightly boring. So pick your character and invite people to your story. Not a question. And here's what I want to say about this, guys. The reason why this is so good, and I learned this lesson, man, years and years ago, before social media has become such a beast as it has become. I love this idea of like being able to invite people into our stories. We live a very self-serving lifestyle right now. Okay, that's just true. I mean, we consume things by services. Somebody delivers groceries to our house. Somebody brings all of I can order everything I ever need off of Amazon, and it is shipped within days, sometimes within hours to my house. I can do everything. I can call a car that will come and pick me up, and I don't even have to think about it. I can rent somebody's house and go stay in a room, and I don't have to think about it. I get to consume almost everything in my life by self-serving services, right? It's that Fight Club moment where Edward Norton's character says that Tyler Durden, obviously, I don't want to spoiler alert, but he's Tyler Durden. But Edward Norton's character is like, he calls everybody single-serving friends. We've lived a single-serving lifestyle, and we have a very instant gratification moment that we live in. And so inviting people into our stories is just almost absent. It's almost absent to have invited people into our stories. And I love what's happening right now, because obviously we're having this conversation based around the fact that the coronavirus has put us all into our houses and has shut us up with our families and given us new inspirations. And I love it. And I think it's going to be a brilliant, beautiful moment for all of us to realize that when we consume life by services, that we miss the story that's happening in between. We miss all the stories, and it'll call us, and it'll cause us to be able to start inviting people into our stories. I want you to think about, there's a moment in this book, and I won't summarize it well, but I'll give you a quick little adage of it. If you have somebody in your family that has kind of gone a little AWOL, have you created a story? Have you created a character for them to play in the story? Have you created a story, and have you created a character for them to play in the story? Most people just want to be able to be invited into a better story. When we have a story that is insufficient, we will go and find a better story. That's just true. I want you to hear that again. In our world, the people who are around us, they'll find a better story. And so we get the opportunity to pick our character and then to invite people into our story. I love the idea behind this moment, because right now, one of my greatest roles that I get to play is dad, and I love playing dad. And I just think about it all the time. Adam gets to invite me into his stories all the time. This morning, I got to be the monster truck, the garbage truck monster truck, who was eating his snacks and growing his muscles. That was my whole role in his whole story, so that the monster trucks could get strong and they could smush cars. 100% want to jump into that. 100% want to be that story. I want to play that story. I want to be in that role. And in our world, we get to invite people every single day. Give those that are around you the best roles. I want my wife to be fulfilled and amazing and loved and all that good stuff. Well, I better give her a role that fills that space. My kids, I want them to have whimsy, and I want them to feel the excitement and the joy. Well, I better be creating stories to where he can feel into those spaces, where Willow can feel into those spaces. I want to be somebody who is something bigger than just me. Well, I better be the person who's bigger than just me, and I might need to have giants in the cast of characters that I play. So for all of us, what can we do to be able to create the characters? Thank you, Anthony. I love that. Thank you for that. What can we do to create characters and invite people into our stories? Okay. All right. So number 4, most of the time when we lose momentum, people we love, and I was leading into this, and this is going to be a point now. When we lose momentum, the people that we love, etc., it's usually because a better story has come along. I really want you to think about this. Somebody has heard or crafted or felt a better story than the one that we're telling. A lot of times when people lose us, or when we lose people rather, it usually tends to be wrapped around this story moment, right? They feel or they felt a better story. The grass is greener on the other side is a story. It's a captivating story. And it's a story that somebody else has believed. or somebody else has told really, really well, or they've just been invited to be a character. I think those are the things. We could be looking at somebody else's story and go, gosh, I just want that. I will leave this and have nothing rather than have this right now if this is the story that I get to be in. Or, oh man, I'm listening to the story that's happening and I'm being invited to that story, so I'm going to go be a part of that story. And I know we're using this word story a lot, and some of you guys may need to just have the definition. When I think about the idea of story, like I am creating what I desire to have in meaningful life. I'm creating that every single day by moving all of the incidents that I incur, right? All of the little moments. Do I get to stand up and be heard? Do I get to tell my version of the story? Do I get to like show up and volunteer? Do I get to give out of my abundance? Do I get to share from my from what I'm good at? Do I get to come alive in the things that I choose every single day? Do I get to smile? Do I get to laugh? Do I get to love? Those are all things that we choose every single day that are defining elements of our own personal stories. Okay. And so with this, I want to read this little quote from the book. It says, where there's an absence of story or perhaps a bad story, a good storyteller walks in and changes reality. He doesn't critique the existing story or lament about his boredom like a critic. He just tells something different and invites other people into the new story he is telling. Okay, I want you to hear that little middle part. He doesn't critique the existing story or lament his boredom like a critic. A lot of us look at those who have chosen to go from our story, they have exited our story that we're telling. And we look at it almost as judgment from the other person. And the reality is that the other person who was involved, that catalyst that moved the story away from your space, they were just a better storyteller. You can't be mad about that. You can just change. You can change and be living a better story, right? I want you to hear that. Nobody really gains when they come in and they critique what's happening on the other side. When we start defending ourselves, it gets a little weird and wonky. But when we start telling a better story, that's captivating at a very high level. It's very, very captivating. And so here's a chance, our moment, to be able to look at it. If somebody is exiting our story, we're not telling a better story. And so this is an action moment today. And as a matter of fact, this is probably the biggest action moment we can take from this today and immediately put it into place. Is where can you immediately start telling a better story? Where can you immediately start telling a better story? The truth is that we all have a better story to tell in every single area of our lives. And if we want to really be invited in as a character to the people around us, right? So there's another side of this, is that we get to be invited into people's stories as well. Then we need to love what they love. We need to show up where they show up. We need to be in their scene. If they've created a scene, then we need to show up. If we want people to come and join us, we need to be telling a good story. We need to be practicing. So where can I start telling a better story? But I should be creating a scene. It's going to be real obvious that I wanted to be able to connect with somebody if I've set the stage for connection. Most of us, we're not setting the scene properly. And we're expecting people to believe they're part of a story that we've never invited them to be a part of. Okay? We need to set the scene. If you want to start practicing a better story, start setting the scene. And sometimes, this is where it gets weird, guys. Sometimes that moment is about narrating, okay? This is just my own personal, this is Randy's opinion to feel cool at this moment when he's talking about Donald Miller and how awesome he is. This is Randy's soapbox moment. Sometimes that can be narration. And a lot of us take that and we're like, oh, but there's no romance in the narration. So still set the scene so that people understand what's happening. Hey guys, today we're going to go for a walk. And once we finish this walk, we're going to do this. And once we do that, we're going to do this. And once we do that, we're going to do this. And that's going to be awesome. It's going to be fun. And when we're done, we're going to get to be able to talk about it all day long. And y'all are going to love it. Blah, 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 blah. I just narrated what's going to happen. A lot of you husband and wives who are having challenges, it happens in my world all the time. And we've got to be able to have a come together moment. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, tonight, I would love to be able to woo and romance you to the point that we have a little bit of an intimate time together. You just set the scene. And guess what? You better start following through with it, because if you expect that to be the words that you say and then that's what's going to happen at the end of the day, not going to happen. You've got to play the role. So I set the scene, I play the role, I become the character, I invite the character into the scene. Things change, guys. Things change when we set the scene in a way. Sometimes it's going to be by narration, especially when you're out of sorts, and especially when you haven't been practicing, guys. Especially when you haven't been practicing, you got to set the scene. You're going to have to go in and say, I want to be X, Y, and Z. This is how that's going to happen. And let's go forward. And that's with our work. That's with our family. That's with our friends. Hey, man, I really want to make sure that you and I can knock this project out of the park. And one of the ways that we can do that is just to stay connected. You and I do not have a very good working relationship because I never tell you what's happening or what's going on. And then I always expect you to know. And so my commitment to you is that I'm going to tell you everything that we're doing and what I'm doing and what's going through, so that you and I, at the end of this, can celebrate cheersing a glass of beer, knowing that we knocked it out of the park because of what's happening right now. Narration to be able to set the scene, not just play the character, okay? So when you're looking at it and you're looking at everything that's going on, where can you immediately start telling a better story? Sometimes you've got to just be bluntly narrating it. You got to schedule it, okay? All right, the last thing that I would say is that living a better story starts with practice. Living a better story starts with practice. That's what this book is primarily about. All the little practice scenes that he created so that he could start telling a better story with his life. And it's some pretty phenomenal things. I actually loved listening to that. There's a lot of things that there's no way I could have done. But he just jumped in. He just jumped in with the messiness and the fear and all of the above to figure out what he could do to start living in the direction of the meaningful life that he wanted to tell. And so every single day, he was choosing to practice a little bit different, a little bit better, and to choose a story that's moving in that direction. And so if you want to see a significance in your life, start practicing a better story. Join a cause or volunteer. Start a hobby. The key, right, if you want to start practicing a better story, is commitment and accountability. So start telling a better story, all right? So the last thing, number 5, is practice. Start practicing, okay? You got to start practicing. The way practice happens, commitment and accountability. Okay? So, in our worlds, why A Million Miles in 1,000 Years is one of the books that I give away the most, is that you could see these were the takeaways that I put into my life years ago. And I'm still not good at all of it, just so that we're on the same page. I'm no example. I'm no example by no means. I do understand what it means to take a step every day towards better, though. I really do. I think that is something that I could credit myself with. I do take a step towards better every single day. So here's the thing that I would say to you guys. Do you need to take away the same things I took away? Absolutely not. If you want to dig into it, I would encourage you to get the book. I think it's a phenomenal book. I think you'll learn a lot about yourself while you're reading it. I think that's the point of it, is to what he learned by editing his life is applicable in ours. But if you just did 1 or 2 of these things that are on this list behind me, I guarantee you're going to start moving into a space of more meaningful. You're going to start moving into a space of story. And story, guys, we're in a relationship economy, right? We're in a relationship economy. Story is currency in a relationship economy. Say that one more time. Story is currency in a relationship economy. And so you need to start investing in yourself and those around you to start telling a better story. I would love, and I don't know that this will happen because I know that this was a very introspective kind of topic to discuss, but I'd love to hear if any of you guys ahas, something that spoke to you, something that was really important, something that maybe you're already doing. I'd love to hear stories around this, all right? I'd love to hear what you're experiencing right now. And here's the reason why I like to see and hear and feel these common experiences is once we get into that space and understand where our common experiences are happening, we understand the solidarity of those who are struggling, that I'm not the only one. A lot of us feel lonely in our struggles, and yet we're not. And then it also gives us the opportunity to not only feel the solidarity, but also to share strengths with each other because there's a lot of things that I learn every single day. And especially from my coach, when I'm having conversations with my coach, I'm like, that's a great idea. And she's like, yeah, I know, I'm a coach. No, I'm just kidding. If she's watching this, she's way more humble than that and brilliant and speaks into my life. So I made her to sound like she's not. She absolutely is. And she absolutely does give me those moments of strength by just mentioning some little small phrase. And I'm like, that's it. That's what I needed. So a lot of us need each other. One. So share your comments. Like, you can comment here in live if you're with me over here on Facebook. I'm monitoring everything that's happening over on the Google site, so the Google Meet site. Crystal's over there. But I want to hear, guys, if you've got some things, I would love to hear maybe 4 or 5 little moments that you think, like, I'm taking this right now and putting into my world. I'd love to see that. I'm gonna give it some time for you to be able to come up with your thoughts. I'm gonna sit here and I'm going to give you some moments, but I want to see like maybe 4 or 5 things that people could come with that says, these are things I'm going to do now, or this really inspired me, or something from that. What did you gain from today that you're going to immediately put back into your world? So I'm going to open up the floor right now for that. And Crystal, if anybody types in, you're welcome to speak it out loud. I think I can see when they pop up. Facebook, if you're with me, with the new Facebook version, I can't see who's actually in the room with me right now, which is interesting. I'm sure I can, but I can't. So if you're with me on Facebook, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So any and everybody, I'd love to hear about 4 or 5 things from us about something that we've learned today, putting back into our world, an aha moment, inspiration moment. I want to hear from you guys. And if you've ever met me, you know that I don't mind silence for a very long time.
I will say, I think that I really liked how you said, do you want to be the character in the background, the one that's cooking or cleaning or being a mom? I think that's a really, wake up statement, I think the question that I would have is, how do you, I know you say practice, but how do you make your story, make your character without feeling fake or feel like you're pretending to be somebody else?
Oh, I really like that. So I think here's the thing. When I say choose your character, right, a lot of us will start moving into that space of like, oh, I need to reinvent myself. I don't think that's true. I think innately there are things in us that are the sweetest moments, right? So I think about those moments in which we want to, gosh, all of us have been inspired, like, I want to do something really cool with my life. Well, the character that goes forward with that versus putting it on the back burner is who you really want to be. And I think there's subconsciously in it, that is who you are. And so let those things kind of unearth and birth out of you. And so like, the guy who wants to play with his kids all the time can choose to be the guy who's fun and creative and plays with his kids all the time. And so that's the character that you can choose. So I don't think it's going like, well, I want to be a superstar, so I'm going to start acting like a superstar. That's not who you are. But all of the things that are those dreams and those moments that have kind of compounded inside of you that are still there. I think about all the people who are like, man, I've always wanted to write a book. Be the character that wrote the book. What did they do? How did they act? What were they doing, right? I've always wanted to climb a mountain. Be the character that climbs the mountain. That character takes sacrifice and moves forward. And so that's, I think, my point more so. And I love, Crystal, what you're saying is to be able to stay authentic. You got to be able to have authenticity. You can't just make a moment of, I'm going to be the Tiger King. It's like, all right, well, why? Have you seen how that tragedy ended? But that's what a lot of us will look like, is that I'm going to show up and I'm going to look as ridiculous as that if I'm going to pretend to be something I'm not. And I don't think that's what we're talking about. It's about, I want to choose to be better, to live better. I want to find romance. Well, I'm going to find a way in which I can be a character that moves towards romance, right? So I think that's the key to it.
That makes sense. I like that.
So Emily, I love Emily. Guys, and speaking of story, I'm going to just give her credit where credit is due. Emily, I'm going to murder her last name like I always do, Wyszynski. She is on here. Emily, I see your light is green. I want you to put your @ for your Instagram. Everybody go follow Emily. Emily is a storyteller, when she says communicating the narrative, she's good at that. Man, I love following her, and I think I know you a little bit, so that helps. But as people can follow you, they can get to know you. If you're okay with it, I'd love for you to share your handle for Instagram. That's where I like to at least watch your stories the most that happen. She's just good. She talks about that narrative. She draws you into the narrative of the craziness, the honesty, the authenticity, the victories, the sadness, and all of that. Like she's good at actually doing that stuff. So I want to give you credit where credit is due over there. Okay, Cedric, this situation actually is giving us a huge opportunity to cement relationships. I love that. It is. Like right now, what's happening with Corona, right? We're living in that. Let's not pretend like it's not what it is. It's Corona. And so looking at that, it is giving us the opportunity to cement relationships. And here's the thing. Why story is so important. And here's what story does real fast. This is why this is really important. We understand, our brains can understand and organize information when we tell it through story faster than if it's an abstract moment. If I learn one or two random news stories, it's going to be harder for me to cement those two things together, using your word there, Cedric. But if I'm telling a story, I actually can capitalize on bringing people into narrative, right, Emily? So I can bring people into the narrative. And what I'm really doing is creating a moment to where they can take the information and it makes sense to them. So if I am telling the story of my life, they understand me faster. Relationship happens faster. Can you help me? Can I trust you? Those are really easy answers to come by when they can really put together the narrative of your story. So I love it. I remember Joe Rogan saying that the view of his life from a perspective of the main character of his own epic tale. Why can't we be that, right? Why can't we be that character? Why can't we be? And I think one of my favorite quotes that you guys will hear me say all the time, Seth Godin, he is one of these other thought process leaders, right? And he has this quote that he says, and I live by it. I need to make it into like a plaque and slap it somewhere. Reject the tyranny of being picked and pick yourself. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Understand it. Reject the tyranny of being picked and pick yourself. Where have you ever heard that word tyranny before? A king or a queen, right? We think about tyranny. We think about the Revolutionary War and all that stuff. That's where tyranny comes into. Reject the tyranny of being picked and pick yourself, which means we get to pick us. We don't have to wait on somebody else. We're not at the default of anybody. We are crafting all of this in real time the way we want it to be. So I love that, Anthony. Hey, I saw something kind of exchanging over there. Chris, I don't know if you want to share.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Macy wrote, I think it's important to remember that even when our story isn't ideal, that people still want to know your truth and see you be transparent and open to share that moment, good or bad, if that makes sense.
It 100% makes sense. And it's kind of like what I was saying a second ago, is that like there's solidarity in all of this. When we find solidarity, we find tribe, right? We find tribes when our stories match. I will say here's the danger in finding tribes that match our story of tragedy, is that there can be that moment when our tragic circle can rise or our tragic circle can suffocate. And you've got to be able to find the right people with the right mindsets that want to choose a character that moves forward. So I love that. I absolutely love that, Macy. And that's true. When people can see and hear who you are, they realize they're okay. I think that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. When they can hear and see authenticity, they realize I'm okay. And that doesn't mean it's like, well, they're worse than me, then I'm doing really good. Although if you want to feel that way, just go watch The Tiger King and you'll feel great about your life. Second time I've referenced that, but it is current, happening right now. But that's the thing. If I'm listening and I'm in my story and I think that everything is falling apart, and I listen to somebody talk about their version of falling apart and that it's okay, I feel okay. And I feel like then I have the ability to climb, right? I have the ability to rise. We all want to feel as if we've had the ability to rise. All right, guys. Anything else out there that you guys want to share? It's okay.
It's Kimberly.
Hi, Kimberly.
How are you?
Doing good, man. This is good. I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is awesome. And one of the things that you said that struck me was that there's always a B player in the background. And so how that translated to me is because since not since all of this started, and yet at times I've pulled myself back more from social media. And because, I'm a mom, so I'm here with Chandler, and, I'm focused on that in a lot of respects, right? And yet thinking about, well, who's the character that I want to be and the story that I want to be able to share and tell? And it's that there are a lot of single moms that are working and now working from home. And so, there's challenges that come with it. And yet there is an ability to have brevity in that. So, beginning a tribe of people who come in, like you said, not with the tragedy of the situation or making it a tragic situation, just bringing brevity and light and ways for, everyone, not just single moms, moms in general, to be able to move together through the world with our children.
Yeah. It's interesting about the whole family dynamic is being shaken up, which is so, I don't know how to say this without judgment, so I hope nobody takes this in judgment, but we're faced to actually look at our child to get out of rhythm and to see them for where they struggle the most, right? We're watching them even in their version of their story struggling or even thriving, right? Let's not pretend like it's just struggle, but we're drawn back to these moments of looking at our family as a space to where we get to play a character in their world. We get to invite them into story. We're invited into story all day long, and we just got to open our eyes to play that world. And as you're looking at that, like you said, the solidarity amongst moms who are doing that same thing. There are a lot of single moms who are doing this right now and figuring it out. And it's really interesting. I grew up in a single mom kind of home.
Mm-hmm.
You do feel alone so often. And that's just true. Like I watched it, and I tried to put it together as a kid, and then as an adult, like I understand what was happening. She just needed solidarity, and I love that you're kind of recognizing that, because you may be able to play a character that's incredibly strong. Because Kimberly, like you are phenomenal. You've got great stories to tell of triumph, and people need to be able to see that, like, who I am, I can play the character that's in my heart and in my soul. I don't have to be suppressed because I don't think it's possible. It is possible. And so to be able to see the possibilities is awesome. I love that.
Right. Thank you, Randy.
You're welcome. Tell Chandler I said hello. She's fat.
I certainly will.
All right, guys. If there's nothing else, let me make sure that I hit all of my little comments. I appreciate everybody chiming in. This is what this is about, guys. It's together. Better together, right? Live a Better Story. A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by Donald Miller. I highly recommend it. It's one of my top books that I recommend to people. It's not your feel-good business book to make you arrange your whole life and get everything knocking out of the park. It's going to call you to create a different mindset around what is possible. And that's what I love about this book. All right, guys. I feel like that was a Reading Rainbow book, but you don't have to take my word for it. Doo-doo-doo. All right. Reading Rainbow buffs, appreciated that. We'll see you guys. Y'all are awesome. Go be amazing. And remember, you have the ability right now to choose to move forward. All right? Y'all be awesome.